Story 1. All of this had happened a few years before. The snow came down on us shyly. Our office had closed for Christmas break. We all took a moment and gazed outside as the roads started filling with snow. Brian, Jake and I were waiting for Kevin to join us so we could leave. He was the one in charge of locking up the building. We were all discussing a little vacation to go for this winter break. All of us had different ideas, but Kevin said he had one which everyone would be on board with. Eventually, he came out and we all got into his car. He handed each of us a pamphlet of a new skiing resort. It was a place we'd never heard of, and as it turns out, it was brand new. One of its owners was a close relative of Kevin's. Brian was instantly sold on the idea. He has always been the professional skier in our group. Jake and I were still not sure, but later on, Kevin declared we would get a discount where we would only have to pay half the price. That was enough for Jake and I to agree to the plan, since most of the time it was hard for us to find a good vacation that came under our budget. This seemed like a good package. I inquired more about the resort. He informed me it was situated on the top of a mountain, but had a road access to get there. The place used to thrive with Native Americans and has lots of history with them. Kevin was a descendant of Native Americans, so we could see why he was excited to visit this place. It was a 3-day package with various skiing activities, treks, and much more. Kevin was particularly excited about a skiing competition. Of everyone in the group, I was the worst skier, so I wasn't very excited about such a competition. However, I did enjoy skiing on my own leisure, not racing anyone, but just gliding through the snow while taking in the wind. We had a lot of brainstorming sessions and ended up with a plan. After 3 days of preparing, we were finally set on our way to the skiing resort. The journey was not very comfortable. Ascending up the mountain was no easy job since it was snowing, and the roads were not safe. The tires struggled to get traction. Knowing Kevin, he might have skipped on changing to newer tires. Most of the journey we would discuss about random stuff. Jake kept asking Kevin about Wendigos and other Native American folklore. Jake was always excited about knowing more about different cultures and their stories. Kevin was pretty knowledgeable with his culture. He was always disturbed when we talked about taboos and monsters, but he never missed an opportunity to spook us. He told us that if there was a blizzard or a foul odor, it meant there was a Wendigo nearby. He further told us that owls are often a companion or an ominous sign that they are nearby. Jake asked about whether the popular representation of a Wendigo with antler horns was true or not. Kevin said as per Native American culture that's true, but pop culture twisted the image a lot. He told us stories of how if a person ate another person or did anything cannibalistic, they would be cursed to be a Wendigo. Brian kept nagging us to change the topic. He was just bored with all these conversations. As for me, most of my conversation consisted of me just listening to the other person. I was never the talker of the group. After many such conversations and slow, careful driving, we finally reached the summit. The cold sometimes even broke through my winter wear. The place was majestic looking, with its modern architecture. It had both glass, wood, and concrete sections. We all looked at each other in excitement. It felt like a luxurious place, one which we could never afford if it weren't for the promotional offer and Kevin personally knowing one of the owners. We parked the car and took our luggage, which was slightly heavy with all the skiing equipment. We were greeted by some housekeepers who took our luggage and placed it on a luggage trolley. Kevin talked to the receptionist and made a call. All of us were awed by the view outside. From the main lobby, you could see the mountains stretch far. The mountain we were on was the smallest of them all. There was a ski lift coming from the base of the mountain to the summit, and there weren't a lot of people there to stand in line to get a ride on it. We were all happy that we decided to come. This place was brand new, so a lot of people didn't know about it, which meant we would be treated well, and there wouldn't be a lot of crowds or rush. Kevin introduced us to the relative he was talking about, and he handed us our room keys. He suggested various activities to do, and even a little trek up the mountains. Since it was already getting late, we decided we would just relax for the evening and enjoy the view, which was never in short supply in that place. The next day, we all got into our gear and headed out. It was way colder than usual, and being on top of a mid-range mountain did not help. Kevin had left us to find out about the competition, while Jake, Ryan and I enjoyed our time skiing. We had a few races on our own, but eventually that became boring for me. I never enjoyed skiing much since my childhood, but that wasn't the case for others. I went back to the lobby to get something hot to drink and asked the receptionist what else I could do. She told me that since it was still early, I could go for a trek to the other mountain. 2 other people had left a little earlier. That seemed like the perfect thing for me, going on a solo trek. I informed the others about my plan and quickly rushed my rucksack. Thankfully, I had all the necessary equipment needed for the trek. They even gave me a walkie-talkie-looking radio which I could use to signal in case of emergencies. The time when I left was around 10. My calculations were to hike for the summit in 3 or 4 hours and stay there or else return. They informed me there was a small cabin at the summit where I could stay for the night, but I wasn't sure if it was something fancy since it was unmanned. Nevertheless, I had taken extra food and a small fire axe in case I needed to go and get some wood for the fire. My decision to stay or not also depended upon the other 2 hikers which left before me. I took the ski lift to go down, and then started my way towards the base of the other mountain. The path was filled with trees and the wildlife in the area was scarce. My phone's network struggled in this altitude, and most of the times I couldn't get coverage. I figured why they were handing out radios. As I ascended, the view by the resort became more blurry. I could feel the snow increasing. My mind kept wondering if I should go back or continue hiking. 2 hours passed by, and I still hadn't reached the summit. I started getting worried then, and the snow was thick now. I could barely see anything other than my path. I didn't know why. Maybe it was my stubbornness, but I still pushed through it to make it to the mountain. The whole surrounding was hinting to go back, but I had my mind set on reaching the peak. I heard some sounds coming from my phone. It had been ringing for a while, but the cold had made me numb and I didn't feel the vibration. I picked up the phone and got worried. There were 20 missed calls from the guys. There was a text saying, "Get back now. There seems to be heavy snowfall." My attempts at calling or even messaging back were in vain as all of a sudden there was no coverage. I stopped on my trails and assessed the situation for a while, until the ground started rumbling. Before I could comprehend what was going on, I was swept by an avalanche. The sun was already setting by the time I opened my eyes. My whole body was aching. The cold winter wind gusted over my face. And then it dawned on me. I was lost and trapped in the middle of nowhere. My hands went towards the radio, but it was missing. My heartbeat quickened as I searched all over for it. It wasn't there. I lost my pouch and bag, which had most of the gadgets, tools and food. I only had an axe which was attached to my belt, and a lighter. I scanned the area. The path up was completely blocked by snow, and the only route was the woods now. As I stepped away from the landed snow, my foot was stuck on something. I looked down, and the sight to the left of me horrified me. There was a corpse of a man all torn apart and mutilated. His torso was ripped open, exposing his entrails and bones. His limbs were scattered nearby, hollowed out, and only had bone and some flesh remains left. I tried to scream, but the cold had left me so dry my throat didn't make any noise. All I could hear was the heavy beating of my heart. I took my axe and readied it. Whatever animal that man had encountered, at least I wanted to be prepared to face it. The cold was seeping fast, and I needed to get away from the reeking body. My only option was to head towards the woods. The snow raged even wilder now. I knew there was a blizzard coming, and I needed to find a shelter soon or I wouldn't make it. As I made my way, I heard a sharp growl. It was far away, but I heard it so clearly. It was unlike anything I had ever heard. I feared it may be the creature the other guy met. Followed by the growl, there was a man's shriek coming from the same direction. I stopped in my tracks and realized the receptionist mentioned those two people that went before me. That voice could be the other person. I didn't know why, but I readied my axe in front of me and started going in the direction where I heard the noises. My mind kept telling me this was a bad idea, but I still wanted to get there and maybe help out. At least I had an axe. As I made my way there, the blizzard was fully on me now, and among the trees, I saw an owl, which seemed to be following me. I stood on my trail motionless. Kevin's stories about the Wendigo rushed into my mind and all of its details. The owl, the mutilated body, the blizzard, all of it pointed to one thing. I stood there contemplating whether I should run while I could, or help the poor soul. Before I made up my mind, I had already gotten my answer. I looked up the path and saw a tall, humanoid figure approaching me, its big yellow eyes looking towards me hungrily. My legs had frozen up. I could barely feel them, let alone control them to run. It let out a low growl and we locked eyes. I could see it now. It looked like it was at least 8 feet. Its long body, skinny with rotten-looking skin which reeked of decay, its teeth sharp and protruding outward, and its long arms and sharp claws stained with thick red blood. It let out a long shriek, so sharp it pained my ears. That was my cue, and I turned around and ran as fast as I could. I neither turned back or used my axe to defend myself. I saw it, and I knew what it was. I finally gained enough distance and stopped to catch my breath. I was panting so hard it was hurting in my chest. After I calmed down, I looked around, and there was no trace of it. My mind kept going back and forth, wondering whether what I saw was real, or was it just my imagination? Its hideous and horrifying face kept emerging in my mind. There was no way that wasn't real. That smell, that reeking body. The blizzard was getting really strong, and I couldn't stand and think about it anymore. I hardly saw where the moon was or which direction I had come from. The blizzard was too intense to see further than a few feet from me. My jacket wasn't keeping out the cold anymore. I struggled to find my balance and walked, fighting the cold wind. Eventually, I reached a cave. I had no choice but to go on and hope there was no animals there. My heart still hadn't recovered from the encounters I had. Something kept telling me to go back, but I knew I would die in the cold anyway, so I took the risk and went in. The cave was, strangely, dimly lit. It looked like the cave went further in. There were rails on the ground. A mine shaft, I figured. I couldn't figure out why or how the lights were still working down here, but I wasn't complaining. I stopped and sat down with my back on a boulder. I couldn't get the image of that thing out of my head. I looked at a lit space opposite me and a chill ran down my spine. There were bones and skulls of many creatures all piled close by. I stood up immediately and hid as I recognized a familiar smell. It was the Wendigo. I hid behind the boulder and peeped out to see the Wendigo coming inside the cave with a torn-off arm in its mouth. My heart thudded with each of its footsteps. I still couldn't believe my eyes. This creature in front of me, as it devoured the arm in its mouth clumsily and spitting the bone away. Suddenly, it raised its head and took a big sniff. There were a few seconds' pause with a sharp move, and it looked in my direction. It felt as if my soul left my body. The Wendigo let out a long, high-pitched shriek and lunged towards the boulder I was hiding behind. I threw the axe in the other direction and made a run out of the cave, hoping it would be distracted by the sound. The blizzard had been going on for some time now, and the snow was almost as high as my knees. I battled the snow and ran using my whole body's momentum. As I was running, I tripped on something and fell down. Unfortunately, it was a downslide, and I tumbled down the slide. I felt my whole body giving in. My vision covered with white snow as I lay there helpless and waiting for either the snow or the Wendigo to take me. Sometime later, I saw a helicopter descend and 2 people came out and rescued me. I told them about the Wendigo, to which they just ignored me. I told them 2 of the people which came before me were dead and mutilated. They both looked at each other for a second and said I was the only one who went hiking and everyone else was back at the resort and accounted for. They took me inside and the helicopter ascended, and I could hear the co-pilot say, "Seems to be showing symptoms of hallucination and delusional behaviors. Could have been out in the snow for longer than we estimated." I was convinced no one would believe me, but I was glad I was alive. Before I continue to the next story, I just want to say thank you for choosing to watch this video, and I hope you're enjoying my narration. If you are, please show your appreciation by liking this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to my channel if you don't already. It really helps me out. Story 2. We had embarked on a trip during winter time. Joe, Emily, Ray and I. We were 4 college students trying to do our project. Ray and I were film students and Joe and Emily, our school friends, were environmental science students. We were all hanging out and talking about our college when Ray asked about something film-related we could do for Joe and Emily. As it turned out, they had to make a report on wildlife patterns during winter and other changes. Ray always wanted to do some kind of documentary, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity for a combined project and a little trip. Both parties instantly loved the idea. It was a long time since all of us had hung out and created something together. Being in Canada meant there was certainly no shortage of snowy weather and wildlife. Ray had located a place near a Native American reservation. He told us it was a magnificent place when he visited it last summer and took some pictures. From the ones I saw on his Instagram page, that place was indeed gorgeous. Ray was an adventure-spirited person. It was clear he would choose a place that is hard to reach. We planned and set out to the place, which was 5 hours' drive. I had to drive as early as 5 a.m. to reach there on time. We did bring some camping equipment and supplies for 2 days, even though we planned to shoot as much as we could in a day, but in an off chance we really didn't have any good footage, we would camp there for the night. Ray was certain all of it was unnecessary and was confident we would have all we need within some hours, but he was outvoted when Emily proposed the idea for camping supplies. Our drive was smooth. The countryside was peaceful to look at. Later, during our drive, the road where we were supposed to enter the woods area was closed and we couldn't go any further down that path. The car wasn't designed to go off-road, especially during winter time, but Ray had pushed it, and we drove through a snow-filled trail. We stopped at a clearing which was close enough to the main road and deep enough to the woods that was the camp area. We all had a hot cup of coffee and planned our shots. We would first go up a hill and get a good aerial view from a small waterfall to the mountain which was adjacent to the reservation. Then, we would track down some wildlife and film them in their natural habitat and how they interact with a snow-filled world. As we made our way up the hill and deeper into the woods, I noticed the coverage was poor here. We hardly got any network. I relayed the information to the group, who just brushed it off, not paying attention. The waterfall was peaceful. I just wanted to sit on the ground and take everything in, but I had to get the shots. Ray started his drone and proceeded to take some breathtaking shots of the snowy woods from a bird's-eye view. Meanwhile, I took shots of the waterfall, took mock videos of Emily and Joe explaining certain things like a reporter. We finished our aerial shots and decided to go to the other side of the river. As we reached there, we saw the snow had a lot of blood spats all around a patch of ground. The snow really intensified the red. Joe looked around and studied the pattern. He concluded a predator might have ripped open a deer perhaps. He added it was natural, but still, I felt uncomfortable at the sight. It looked like someone took a barrel of blood and poured it all over the snow. Emily pointed out some footprints which resembled the four legs of a deer. We took pictures of the scene. All of us searched. We couldn't find the other animal's footprints. We tried going deeper into the woods, but couldn't see a lot of wildlife. There were some small animals here and there, but there were no large animals. Suddenly, along our journey, it started snowing heavily. Emily looked around alarmed. She told us a blizzard was coming, and then Joe and Emily argued for a while. Joe, calming the situation, checked the weather report, and there was no way a blizzard was in the making. Ray and I looked around as the snowfall got thicker and thicker. We knew no good footage would come out of this. Ray declared we should go back to the car and wait it out. The group agreed, and we headed back. While heading back, we saw a lone owl fly close by. It was almost like it was watching or following us. As we crossed the river back to the side where our car was parked, the blizzard calmed down almost. Even the owl had disappeared. Emily looked puzzled at the situation. Something didn't add up. We made it back to our car and I reviewed the footage and shots. Joe and Emily were still arguing over the weather, but Emily was confused now more than anything. I got everyone's attention and told them that we needed to camp here since the footage we got was hardly anything. All of us started setting up our tents. Ray had decided to stay in the car only. There were facilities to charge our phone from the car battery, but we couldn't use our laptop with that. Because of that, I didn't have any other work to do, so I went out to explore for a bit. I took my camera just in case I found something interesting. It was already night by the time I had gone, but there was enough moonlight to light my way and take some low-light pictures. I just went exploring to the hill where we were earlier. My sights gazed around the other side of the river, where we found the blood splats. Something about that still didn't settle with me. While my eyes were passively gazing at the woods, lost in thoughts, something caught my eyes. I saw a tall figure dash inside the woods. It seemed like a shadowed man and was incredibly fast. The trees along that place were shaking too, so it wasn't something I imagined. As I tried to squint my eyes towards the woods, I heard a sharp shriek. It caught me off guard, and my head pulled back. It was so sharp and loud. A chill ran down my spine. The strange shadow man and the shriek left me with an unsettled feeling. I quickly turned around, and as I did, I saw two big yellow eyes staring at me. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the owl staring at me from the rock just behind me. The owl flew away after I shooed. Its pattern was recognizable. It was the same one which was following us through the blizzard. I was really spooked by all that and rushed back to the camp. I told the others what I saw, but they just said it was some other creature and not a man or anything. Perhaps they were right, since the woods might have cast a shadow and I was seeing some overlap shadow. My mind had eased off and had forgotten about the incident. We had a little campfire going, which was struggling to keep up with the winter wind, but it was enough to warm us. The next day we set out early to make the most of the day. We brought some wood and water along with us so we didn't have to go back to the camp just to have lunch. Joe led the team past the river to the other side and further into the woods. He told us he noticed some beavers walk so we might find a group of them. I took some shots along the way, and a few short videos. As we walked, I noticed some of the trees had marks on them. I brought it up to the attention of the group. They looked around and saw even more marks, long scratches, which seemed to scrape a lot of the bark. Emily said it looked like it was done by a bear, but since it's winter, They would be in hibernation, so it was unlikely. The same uncomfortable feeling I had yesterday returned. That was roughly the same place where I saw the shadow run by the night before. This time, though, I did not tell the group as I felt a little embarrassed from yesterday. We walked further and eventually found the beavers. We made the most of it and got as much footage as possible. Joe suggested us to go even further, to which Emily objected. We had already gone a lot further in, but Joe and Ray doubled down on wanting to continue. As we walked, we came across a dead fox. It was like before, the same blood splats all over the snow. The fox was ripped apart and its head was torn off. Joe studied the fox and said, "Clumsy killer." That had made sense, the blood pattern, and why it was all over the place. Before we could discuss anything, we heard a loud, sharp shriek. All of us froze. I recognized that sound. It was the same one I heard. Out of nowhere, the blizzard came back. It was as though someone flipped a switch and the blizzard came on command. All of us huddled together. Joe said we would hold each other's hands and try to make it back to camp. We walked in single files, holding each other, led by Joe. I was at the end and held Emily's hand. I had an eerie feeling, so I kept glancing back. I didn't know what I was going to find, but my instincts told me to stay sharp. We heard the same shriek multiple times now. It was getting close, so we increased our pace. Our vision was scarce as the blizzard got thicker. I could barely see anyone past Emily. Even the sound was blocked off. Joe was instructing something, but I barely heard it. My hands were becoming numb now. I hardly felt Emily's hand. Crouching down, I could see Joe was looking around before making his move. I knew it then. We were lost. We all stopped and huddled together. Joe took out his phone only to be disappointed from the lack of coverage. All of our phones were like that. The offline map we downloaded wasn't useful since we didn't know where we were to make out the direction. We heard a noise coming from the side of us. Suddenly, a deer burst into our vision and collided with us, directly hitting Ray and sending the rest of us flying to the ground. I managed to get up, only to find out I was alone. I called out for the others, but the blizzard was so loud I barely heard some mumbles in some general direction. I pursued the sounds, only to be more lost than I previously was. While I was walking, my legs bumped something. I looked down, and a chill ran down my spine. It was the deer which collided with us, but now it was dead, with its head torn off and body half-eaten. My body was not only gripped with a cold, but horror too. I scanned the whole area and saw the owl's big yellow eyes. This time, however, I saw another pair of yellow glowing eyes. The tree line was barely visible, but the glowing eyes slowly started rising. My heart sank as I saw the eyes hovering way above the owl, and I saw a figure, like a tall human. It let out a wild shriek and leapt towards me. I screamed like my throat was going to burst and jumped out of the way, scrambled to my feet, and ran as fast as I could. The rushing wind was so intense, I felt like I was being pulled back. I heard a scream from the same direction I was running towards. It sounded like Emily. In the snow, I finally managed to find her. She was on the ground, scrambling to get up. I helped her up, and she was crying and pointing at something. I looked and saw a long figure crouched down. It looked pale and rotten. Its hands were long and ended in sharp claws. We saw it claw down a deer and bring its head down to bite the deer down. Both of us were petrified at the sight. Suddenly, the creature stopped and turned around. Its face was hideous, with glowing yellow eyes looking at us. Its mouth looked like something chewed its lips off. its razor-sharp teeth sticking out like spikes on barbed wires, but denser. I could clearly see the figure now. It reeked as bad as it looked. It took another clumsy bite from the beer, and in that interval, Emily pushed me, and we ran. After a while, we hid beside a tree. I didn't realize, but I was out of breath and my legs were trembling. In the far distance, we could still hear the sharp shrieks of the creature. Emily was in shock. She was just staring at the direction where we came from. I looked around and found it was a place we came before, where the beavers were. But further along, I saw there were no beavers alive anymore. The water beside them was polluted with red, and their little bodies ripped open and their limbs torn off. Emily asked me if what I saw she saw, to which I said yes. Neither of us were hallucinating. It was real. Since we found the river, we followed it up the hill and crossed the other side back to the camp. Luckily, the blizzard wasn't around anymore. We got back to our camp, only to see it all torn apart. The tents were shredded, and our supplies were scattered all over the place. There was no sign of Ray and Joe. We checked out the car, which now had a huge tree fallen on top of it. Nothing that happened there was explainable. I ran back to the hill and scouted the area for Joe and Ray. I heard a scream from nearby and saw Ray running towards the hill. I looked towards the other side of the woods and saw a tall creature, the same one Emily and I saw earlier, but he was watching the other side, the side where Ray was running. Upon closer look, I saw he was running from something. He was running from another one of those creatures. My whole body felt like collapsing. I felt all the strength in me drain when I saw the other one. Suddenly, the creature stopped, stood up, and kept staring at Ray, who was now climbing up the hill after seeing me. Both of the creatures stared at each other. Ray had frostbite all over his face. Before even a second thought, we ran back. Back at the camp, we saw Joe was panting hard. He told us he got separated and wandered and was being chased by a creature. The same creature which chased me and Ray. We struggled to remove the tree from the car, and after some effort, managed to do it. The car was running, so we pushed the roof up and made a space for all of us. None of us talked throughout the journey. Right after reaching the closest town, we rushed to the local authorities and informed them of what happened. They didn't believe us, but they did send a scouting party to check the place out. We all got home and didn't ask about what the scout found. None of us ever brought up the incident ever again. Thank you for watching and or listening to this video. Again, if you enjoyed my narration, please go ahead and hit the like button. And if you don't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and select the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of my future uploads. Also, please leave a comment on this video letting me know what you thought of it. Comments really help with the YouTube algorithm and will really help my channel to grow. If you have a story you would like me to narrate, please email it to me at mrsinisterstories@gmail.com. If you want to support my channel even further, there are a number of ways you can do so. You can consider leaving me a tip for this video via my PayPal, link is included in the description. Check out my Teespring store and consider purchasing one of my shirt designs. I have a new design with a Dogman, Wendigo and Skinwalker and Bigfoot all on a zebra crossing. This is a must for anyone who's into these types of stories. Some people have been asking in the comment sections if I have done any audiobooks, and the answer to that is yes. On Audible, there is a book Punch by J.R. Park that I narrated. I do get a small royalty if you decide to purchase that. It's a revenge/a horror novel that was a lot of fun to narrate. I would like to do more audiobooks at some point in the future. Lastly, the way you can really help me to grow is to share my content with anyone you might think is interested in it. Thanks again for watching.